Welcome back to Culture Crossroads. We're joined to this segment by Beck TV's own Trent Loos, host of Trent on the Loose, host of Rural Route. It is Rural Route because every time you say it like Roll Route, and I think it's Roll Route, and so I think Roll Tide. And as you know, because I worked with you on your show. Sometimes I don't hear everything correctly, and then all of a sudden I'm in a different world. It is Rural Route, right, Trent?
Are you telling me I don't enunciate properly, Andrew? I need to do a better job at enunciation?
I'm just saying that for this Florida boy, there might be some Nebraska or Great Plains dialect that I maybe am not familiar with.
I think it's
not that there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah, Rural Route Radio.
Rural Route Radio. Trent on the Loose. Across the pond, you got that in the mornings. Let's see, I'm forgetting one. A Wing and a Prayer. No. That's right. Or is that still going?
It's still going. It is still going.
Yeah, I should know that. It's on Beck, but
Yeah.
Anyway,
and
all right.
Loose Tales. This week is my 25th year of broadcasting Loose Tales radio program.
How about that? Congratulations. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. There are there are few people that get 25 years, let alone 5 years in this kind of work. So that's remarkable. And you're also a rancher. And I know you'll say it's Kelly Loos that's doing the ranching and people tease you about that. But for crying out loud, I know you got 80 acres. It's not like you don't have anything to do. So that's a big deal. Anyway, let's talk about another big deal here. You obviously your whole work is food producers to food consumers. And one of the attacks we're seeing on our freedom is on those food producers in order to control the food consumers. I want to bring a couple of excerpts from this recent People magazine article about what's going on when it comes to eggs and how they relate to our food supply and our national stability and security, both when it comes to whether or not we can eat, but also quite literally the government tyranny that I believe the mechanisms are still in place, whether or not we have Trump in the White House or not. It only takes the right emergency that they feel they can get away with to bring everything back and bring it back harder. But let me get to this article here. You can see the headline, Egg Prices Soaring at Your Grocery Store. It's because of bird flu. Let me give you a couple of excerpts here. The price of wholesale eggs have skyrocketed across the U.S. because of highly pathogenic avian influenza, also known as bird flu. Wholesale prices for large eggs hit $5.57 per dozen in the Midwest. I know that in California, there were reports of $9 for a dozen of eggs. There you have $8.85. And then you have a quote, the primary driver behind these historic prices is the ongoing spread of avian influenza, which is claimed over 20 million layers during the fourth quarter at a time that coincides with the year's highest demand period. And they say the outbreak began in 22. It's affected nearly 129 million chickens, turkeys, other birds, blah, 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 and backyard flocks in all 50 states. The U.S. Department of Agriculture said it's been funding research for vaccines, surprise, surprise, that could protect poultry, cows, and the bird flu. However, your friend, Secretary of Ag Tom Vilsack, said there would be long-term challenges. According to Vilsack, widespread vaccination of commercial poultry is not possible in the short term. This in a letter from back in March of 2024. The interesting thing, all of this is interesting, but Dr. Joseph Cabas in Critical Care Clinic told People magazine that pasteurized milk is going to be safe and also cooked eggs. In general, we should be cooking our eggs, not eating raw eggs. But as long as these are pasteurized dairy products and cooked foods, it really would eliminate any kind of risk to us. So one of the first things I'm wondering here is if this is such a huge danger and it's the next shoe to drop in terms of a public health emergency and so on. And why are we, but yet at the same time, it doesn't really pose a risk because it could be pasteurized or whatever else. We really haven't seen human to human spread in any meaningful way. They barely just now found one severe case, they say. I think it was an elderly guy in Texas with a whole bunch of other problems who died, and they're giving the credit to bird flu. That report just came out this morning. So they're really trying to...
I think he's in Louisiana, but you're
Louisiana, is he?
Yeah.
so they're trying to gin up the same fear. They're trying to gin up all this stuff again to re-rack it. But, one of the questions that I have is you're saying, well, it's really not much of a concern. However, they say that the solution is either vaccines or apparently culling flocks and herds left and right. Help me make some sense of this.
No, I'm not going to be able to help you make sense. I'll just start right there. And I just have to fact check you on one thing. I don't want you to lead any viewers astray to believe that Tom Vilsack is literally a friend of mine. If I was to rank the 8 billion people on the planet in terms of people I like the most and people I like the least, Tom Vilsack would be at the very bottom.
I had my sarcasm font on there, but I guess
I just wanted to make sure that nobody, missed that sarcasm.
Yes.
Fact checking. The other thing that pretty much everything the People magazine article says is true. Pretty much. It's a matter of how it's positioned. For example, it said that 20 million laying hens were killed. No, it didn't say that. It said 20 million laying hens were euthanized because of bird flu. There was a percentage of those 20 million hens that had bird flu that were tested positive for what they say the strain H5N1. The protocol that the United States Department of Agriculture has put into place is largely suspect by me, a person who has provided daily care for 1 million animals in my lifetime. And that is that if a bird tests positive on any farm, the USDA comes in and euthanizes the entire flock, not just animals in that pen, not just animals in that barn, animals at that location, the entire flock are euthanized. There is no justification whatsoever. In fact, everybody who understands immunology and developing an immune system is that if you continue to eliminate the animals that are exposed to any type of pathogen, you're never going to develop a natural resistance to these animals. The interesting part of that, Andrew, is that I wonder how many people know that it is eggs that are used to culture the vaccines that we have been using. And I was in a lab at the University of Wisconsin years ago with Dr. Mark Cook, who was the forerunner in making this happen. And I'm talking about simple things like anthrax. I'm talking about any vaccines that we use, because what the chicken does is it's exposed to a toxin. It develops an antibody within itself. It puts that antibody in the egg to protect the offspring that's going to come. And then we culture that toxin or that resistance to the antibody that's created in the egg and put it in the form of a vaccine. That's how vaccines are supposed to be created and have been created until the last 5 years. So for us to just go in and ruthlessly, I'm going to use that word on purpose, ruthlessly euthanize 20 million laying hens should cause the question, what's the real objective here? And I want to also tie in, because it wasn't mentioned in this article, at the same time, we had three states, Arizona, Michigan, and Colorado, who have, as of January 1, 2025, new laws which state that all eggs produced in the state or sold in the state must come from cage-free environments. That's been a large going debate, and it's now estimated that over 40% of the eggs produced in the United States come from cage-free farms, which, number one, you're going to pay more, because what the farmer must spend in terms of building a barn to protect the chickens and then provide you with a cage-free egg costs more money than it does in a cage. And we put chickens in a cage to protect the chicken, mostly from the other chickens. I always share with people, how many times have you talked about the pecking order? Do you know where the pecking order actually originated? It originated within chicken flocks, because there would be chickens pecking on the weak ones, and the mortality is significantly higher with these egg-laying facilities where they are in cage-free environments, where instead of being in a cage where they are protected. And so there's many things going on with this, but at the end of the day, there's one other factor that I want to share, because we have, my in-laws have chickens, and this week with the cold weather that we've had and the shorter days, they've not been getting eggs, period, because the chickens just go through a natural cycle of molt because they know that the weather is going to be more severe. Many people I'm talking to are experiencing that this week. The chickens that are in a barn, the chickens that are in a cage, they have official lighting. They have artificial vitamin D that's put on them. And in 2024, we hit a record where the eggs produced per hen, per laying hen, was 300 on an annual basis. And for a long time, we were running at about 200 to 280 to 285. And we thought that was a tremendous progress from where we had been. And the reason I share that number, and the reason that number is important, is that chickens, just like people, do not reproduce when they're stressed. It's a natural instinct that we have within our living self to say there's some stressor in the environment. This is not a good time for reproduction. When the chicken is laying 300 eggs in a given year, 365 days, you know that the majority of the stress inducers have been minimized. And so I just wanted to share that little synopsis of what's going on in the chicken world. And I do not see any reprieve coming very quickly and what the egg prices are. Even in central Nebraska, where I live and operate our ranch, $3 eggs have been kind of a norm, or $2.79 for a long time. At the last time my wife went to the grocery store, she said they were $5.70. So we're seeing the same direct effect here. Reports of Colorado, California, retail eggs selling for more than $9 to $10 a dozen. This is a real issue when you take into consideration the amount of nutrient-dense protein and other macronutrients that you get from an egg. We need eggs to be affordable and to be a part of people's diet.
Let me ask you this. Yeah, here in Florida, we're between $6 and $7 for just not even, whatever the special fancy eggs.
Sure.
So it's, it's everywhere. And red states, blue states, no one's immune to this. What would you normally do in a herd? An animal gets sick, because what we're hearing is, okay, this animal gets sick, we got to kill them all. And the popular, tidal wave or narrative that's going to be constructed is, well, gee, that's what we have to. It's for the greater good. It's to save us all from the great pandemic or whatever it's going to be. But is this what you do when you have an animal that gets sick? You just kill off everything that you have on your property? What's the normal protocol?
Normal protocol is to separate that animal from the rest of the herd so that there is not transmission. And to your point earlier, there is no known transmission from person to person. How it transmits from one to another is still an unknown factor. They continue on to blame migratory fowl without any documentation that that's the case. But when you have animals that are identified as being sick, you remove them from the rest of that barn or that herd. You put them in an isolated area, or you could even euthanize that animal immediately so that you didn't have to deal with it. What I mean by deal with it, but you didn't have the potential to expose the rest of the barn. There's no justification for euthanizing the entire barn, particularly in light of the fact what was illustrated in this article that you shared is the risk to human health is barely even existent at a very minuscule level.
How do eggs affect the rest of our food supply? Explain the domino effect from this.
So actually, this week I really wanted to do my own deep dive, and there were people, a gentleman from Maine who in 1897 had eggs, he had chickens, had laying hens, and he had a theory, because you think about 1897, we didn't have refrigeration. So how did you store food in 1897? You did it through salt, or you did it through freezing. He figured out a mechanism to freeze dry eggs and sell them to the baker, because we think about the eggs that we buy by the dozen and we cook for breakfast, but there are so many food ingredients, including noodles, including cake mixes, including so many things that have come from what we call the breaking egg industry. And this gentleman, this is not really relevant to your story or your question, Andrew, but it's very interesting to me. This gentleman learned how to perfect this freeze drying of eggs. He moved to Boston because there's a larger population, and he really pioneered selling eggs that had the ability to last longer. Well, you're never going to guess what country about 1912 had also learned how to freeze eggs and ship from their country to the United States what they called squares of frozen eggs, which had the shelf life that would go into the baking and the cooking business, not into what we call table eggs, which are the eggs we eat for breakfast. You know what country that might have been? 1912, I remind you.
No.
China. I find it so interesting that here we are worried about our dependence, rightfully so, on China for everything that we absolutely rely on, and now including food in some cases. We have been dealing with this for over 100 years, but eggs permeate throughout so much of the food supply. Even when you don't know that you're eating an egg, there's eggs included. And a lot of the drinks, a lot of the sports drinks, you'll find components of milk and eggs in those. And I don't want to leave that out because, quite honestly, the greatest economic devastation is occurring to the dairymen. For whatever reason, I have my suspicions we can go into when we have time, that dairy cows are also being affected by H5N1, and it's putting a very big economic hurt, particularly on California dairies at this time.
And wasn't it, I believe you actually covered this story on your show, Trent Loos. Isn't California now not necessarily outlawing, but if you have a flock of more than 3,000 in California, which would be most of them, isn't it testing and a whole bunch of other regulation? Explain a little bit of that front, if you would.
Yeah, that's not only the chicken business is not mandatory testing. The 3,000 number actually comes from the number of birds you have to have. If you have 3,000, then you're required by some of those states that I mentioned earlier to be cage free. Okay. That's where that comes into play. In the dairy business, they are now mandating every dairy cow be tested for H5N1. And this does not make sense in any way, shape, or form to put this kind of an expense and this kind of a data toll on the dairymen of this nation. It reminds me of December 28th, 2003, when then Secretary of Agriculture Ann Veneman issued a press conference and said, in an abundance of caution, and what her abundance of caution was that 100% of specified risk material during what we call the cow that stole Christmas, which was actually a cow that tested positive for bovine spongiform encephalopathy, there was an additional cost that has occurred by the beef industry of $150 per head in her terms, in an abundance of caution. Here we are today, by the way, and she said this was just going to be a temporary thing, we'll go back to normal. We are normal, and we never eliminated that. We're still spending an extra $150 per head to remove spinal and brain tissue from these animals, which is called specified risk material, without any science to verify that we need to be doing that. And we are repeating the same mistake today. And what happens is, at the end of the day, the consumer is paying more money for a product that really has no more degree of safety.
What do we do about this? What are solutions? And I know, in fact, actually, I'll give you more props on another one of your previous episodes. You interviewed an attorney that was, that advocated, hey, we need to be involved in our, we need to be involved locally, but also looking at the process. That if our process is bad, the whole thing is going to be bad. We're on the consumer end. Most of us, I'm not a rancher. I don't have anything. I can barely grow grass, let alone anything that would be functional for a community. But how do we fight back? There's got to be a way to stop, because they're just doing this. They're not putting this up to a vote. We don't get to have referendums on this every 2 years. They just do it. And eventually they're going to just do it to a point where we're backed into a corner. And I really want to avoid those days if we can, or keep them from coming. What can we do in every state? Because, like we said, this is not just blue states, or this is not just purple states. This reaches every single state, and it affects so much of our lives. How do we fight back?
That's the question that should be asked every time we have a discussion, Andrew, and I appreciate you asking that. And there's really only one, and Wally Cogden is the attorney that you were talking about from Montana, and that is that we must engage in the process. We must get loud. Whether we believe it or not, this country is still ruled by people who generate the biggest voice. And just like the caged laying situation, where we have cage-free environments now and mandated, not an option, mandated in 9 states in the United States, that was because there was a loud minority. It's not the majority of people that demand that, it's a minority. The key in that whole sentence is loud. When the founding fathers got together and put this document to piece and put it to paper that we talk about called the United States Constitution, and when they started amending that, what did they put as the first and what I believe is the primary amendment? The right to free speech, the right to assemble, the right to be heard. We need to get very loud and demand accountability and answers to how the USDA is handling this situation. And I'm glad you brought it up one other time. Don't sit back and say, well, all of this will be fixed. Trump's going to be in office in a couple of weeks. We'll get back to normal. I'll just remind you that we all lived through something we don't ever want to live through again with the COVID-19 experience. And I might ask you, who was the president when that all rolled out and really got into full swing? It wasn't Joe Biden. So don't sit back and expect somebody else to take care of this. The person that you look at in the mirror is the best qualified and the person who must address this and start asking questions that have not previously been asked.